What do you see socialism doing for the rest of our lives? Ooh, it's an easy question. All right. Very quickly, because we have run out of time. Socialism deserves an evening, and over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll pick one and we'll spend an evening dealing with it. Let me leave you with almost like a teaser about that, and you'll come back and hear me out. Socialism in its first 150 years, roughly 1850 to the end of the last century, 2000, defined itself in terms of the economy as a whole. The basic idea was capitalism was a system characterized by private ownership of the means of production, right, and markets. Ownership by private individuals of the factories and the offices and all that, and the distribution of resources and products by means of a market. I give you 6 of these, you give me 4 of those, right? Keep that in your head. Socialism was considered to be the alternative, not private ownership of the means of production, but the government. The government would come in and own and operate the factories, the stores, and the offices, and do it for all of us as a people, rather than for the benefit of the few who own it. So socialism was the government coming in and also doing away with markets, and the reason was very simple. A market is a way of distribution that favors the rich. You all do understand that, even if it gets muddy in your head sometimes. You do understand, because you know when you go in the mall, the fatter your wallet, the more fun you're going to have in the mall. And the thinner your wallet, the more you'll be sad looking at the windows where you can't buy. The market distributes to the people who have the most. It doesn't ask how you got it. It doesn't ask whether you deserve it the most. It just asks, have you got the money? You get it. And if you don't have the money, get out of here. For those of you that think you have ethics and morals, try to square that with a market. So the socialists always said, and they had an easy time, particularly with the religious Christians. You know, the Bible, you have all got to be socialists. Norman Thomas, the leader of American socialism for most of the 20th century, was a Protestant minister, as were many, because it was the clearest thing for them. So socialism was the government owns and operates the enterprises and plans the distribution according to people's needs. If you're a child, you get milk. Whether or not you have money isn't the issue. You get the milk because you're a child. That was socialism. And when revolutions happened, when the socialists went the next step beyond criticizing private ownership of the means of production and criticizing markets, when they took the next step and became not critics, but administrators of a society they were in charge of, what they did was what you would figure. They had the government take over the businesses, and they had the government plan the distribution rather than having markets. The problem with this arrangement was not that it didn't get economic growth. That was an achievement of socialism. And no matter what you think about socialism, making believe what I just said isn't the case is not going to advance your argument. The 2 fastest growing economies in the last 100 years have been, first, the Soviet Union, and second, the People's Republic of China. That ought to give you some idea. If economic growth is what you want and need, if becoming no longer poor, but now wealthy as a country, if that's your number one goal, then you ought to be the kind of socialist they had then, because that's what they've done. First in Russia, then in China. The problem is, they didn't here comes the punchline. They didn't transform something. They left something untransformed when they made their changes, the socialists. They left the organization of production inside the enterprise pretty much unchanged. The mass of workers came to work 9 to 5 every day, 5 days of the week. True, it wasn't a board of directors elected by shareholders who told them what to do. It was a group of government officials sent there by the political party or the government who told them what to do. But being told what to do is what they were continuing to have from before. The revolution didn't change that. And that's very dangerous, because what happened to socialism in Russia, in Eastern Europe, in Cuba, in Vietnam, and in China was that the unchanged structure of production undid the changes they did achieve at the top. In the end, they couldn't survive. And the property went back into private hands, Russia, Eastern Europe, and the market resumed the entity, the institution of distribution. The planning apparatus atrophied and died. Therefore, in the 21st century, socialists who don't disappear because their way of proceeding turns out not to have worked real well, socialists have turned around in the last 50 years and asked the question, what did we do wrong? What was the mistake? Why did the Soviet Union implode on itself? Why does China function the way it does? And they've been busy, these socialists. There's lots of them, in case you're not aware. And they've come up with some really good ideas about what went wrong. Of course, as an American, you wouldn't know because we've had a taboo on everything about socialism for 50 years. We have no idea what their self-criticism was. We have no idea where it led, what insights they have, what new developments, what new definition of socialism they produce. So let me fill you in as the conclusion for today. They decided that their big mistake was not to have transformed the workplace, not to have transformed the inside of the factory, the office, the store, to have changed the big picture, what in economics is called macroeconomics, the big picture, but not having changed the base. That the mistake they made was not to understand that the term socialism has to include not just the government taking over, not just planning instead of markets, but to make it work properly, you have to give the people the power at the base of society to make sure that works for them. Otherwise, you make it work for the elite that run the government, which is what we saw happen. So what's the solution? Socialism in the 21st century has a different meaning. It's not that it isn't state ownership and state planning. It can have that, but that's not the primary issue. The primary issue is the base. And the base means to transform the workplace from the hierarchical, authoritarian, tiny group of people at the top, whether they be privately elected by the shareholders or put there by a government apparatus. That's got to go. What there has to be is the mass of people democratically together own and operate and make all the decisions, enterprise by enterprise, factory, office, store. That way you finally put the people in charge. You cannot have a government by, of, and for the people if you do not have an economic system by, of, and for the people. This country tried to have political democracy without ever having economic democracy, and that's as big a failure as macro transforming capitalism into socialism, but leaving the base unchanged. Socialism, therefore, is leaving the prioritization of the macro and shifting, not against those old ideas, but something has to be added. The key addition is to transform the workplace. Or to use the language you sometimes hear me use, worker cooperatives is the organization you have to move towards because it is the solution, not just to the injustices and inequalities of capitalism, but it's also the solution to the failures of the earlier phase of socialism. Don't be upset by this. No system comes into the world the first time all fully worked out with all the details, all the T's, crossed and the I's dotted. Capitalism tried 10 different ways of emerging out of feudalism before it figured it out. Socialism has to try several before it figures out how to get out and beyond capitalism. We've just lived through a major first effort, Russia, China, and all of that, and we're about to launch now on the second one. And the second one will have learned from the first, which is as it should be.